Hello, welcome to my channel. Before we start, if you can give me a thumbs up and comment and subscribe, I'd appreciate it. As the title says on this, on the thumbnail to this video, um, why the Jews? And I'm not Jewish, as everyone here knows. I'm a devout, practicing, traditional Catholic. But I've, Judaism, Christianity, Catholicism came out of Judaism. We share the same Old Testament. They would just call it the Hebrew Bible. We would call it the Old Testament. Catholics, we use the Septuagint, which is in Greek, but the writings are pretty much all there. And I've also enjoyed reading other Christian literature. Jewish literature, the Talmud, and other Jewish writings. And I've had a lot of, over my lifetime, a lot of rabbis that I've enjoyed talking to. And the reason I'm making this video is because a few days ago I watched a video with Dennis Prager on trigonometry. And I've listened to Dennis for a long time. I met him once in Glendale at the Americana. He was just walking by with a suitcase, pulling a suitcase behind him. And I went up and introduced myself to him, and I told him, I was a big fan. I've been following him for a long time, since I think he first started on the radio back, would have been the early 90s. But one of the hosts, Constantine, I think, asked him, why the Jews? And he says he never got a good response. And so then Dennis said he wrote a book on it. And Dennis gave a response. And the response had something to do with, it was like a slogan almost, Sinai, excuse me, and it involved the word Sinai for Mount Sinai, and then another Hebrew word, Sinai, that sounds like Sinai. And essentially, he said that it's the Jews. The Jews have been singled out. The Jews have been persecuted because they brought the law down from Mount Sinai. And the law is what's formed Western civilization. Interestingly, the Jews were not big on proselytizing. They expanded just by birth rates, just by having children, by procreating. And it wasn't until Christ that non-Jews became Christians. And of course, there were the great missions that happened at the beginning of, the beginning of the Christian faith, from the year 100 or 1 till now. And there were missions everywhere. There was a period right around the time when Christianity was legalized that it saw, I think, its most expansion. But anyway, and the Jewish faith, or the Old Testament, the law, the Torah, we would call the Pentateuch, was taken to the world by the early Christians. And so I'm not quite sure that I agree with Dennis that's the reason why. I offer something different, and we'll see what you think about this. Okay. And one of the things that's distinctive about Judaism and the faith and Christianity, it's hard to separate them both because of the Old Testament. But one of the things that, when we believe that God revealed himself and these writings are inspired, the Old Testament, one of the things that was significant about it is that about the writings is that the demands that it called on us were not easy demands. Um, and I'll use the one that I've used before. Thou shalt not murder. Sometimes people cite some of the versions. It'll say you shall not kill. The Hebrew word that they use is murder. A kill and murder are very different things. Murder is a correct word, but murdering was part of the Ten Commandments. We are ordered not to murder, and we're ordered to do a lot of other things. Another one was, marriage, being monogamous, although that came later. But that's what we're called to be monogamous. Um, there are certain laws about how we treat others, with kindness and charity, and these are all embedded in the Bible, in the Old Testament. And here's my argument: is that these requirements. If you ever see a Orthodox Jew, man or woman, they're very distinctive. The men have the hair with it's grown. um, they do not do any work on Saturdays, the Sabbath. It's very disciplined for men and women. And I know something that's also kind of distinctive is that marriage is a huge thing, particularly in Orthodox. And I'm talking about Orthodox because they're the ones that are the most loyal or faithful to the written Word of God. And years ago, when I was working at a food manufacturing company, we had a rabbi that used to come by, and he used to come by and inspect, make sure that everything was kosher, and that everything was right. What there was a list that we kept, and everything was there. And he and I, because he was a rabbi, it was very interesting to me, and I would talk to him. And at one point, I think I asked him for his card, and I asked him where he was from. He was from Argentina, and he didn't look Hispanic, but a lot of Argentinians don't. And we, over the course of several years, we would talk to each other. And at one point, I think I mentioned that I considered myself 49% Orthodox Jew and 51% Catholic. And it was because I admire the faith so much. The Hebrew, um, the teachings that are in the Old Testament. Um, some of my favorite verses, Isaiah, I think Isaiah chapter 49. Can a mother ever forget a child at her breast? Even if she were to forget, I will not forget you. Behold, I have engraved your name in the palms of my hand. I love that verse. It's one of my favorite verses. So, um, the what one of the things about Judaism is that back then they kind of went against the grain for where they were. I mean, they were surrounded by pagans. They were surrounded. Then, of course, when the Romans arrived, and of course the Greeks had been there, and the Greek had their gods, and then the Romans took those gods and renamed them. Jupiter became Zeus, and so on. But they were essentially, they were pagan. They were really just ways of explaining nature, like the sun. I think that Apollo was the one that took the sun across the sky, and the underworld was Hades or Pluto, depending on which country. Um, but the monotheism, and there have been other monotheistic faiths, but the monotheism of the Jews, it did not make life easy for them. They had to listen to these rules and follow them, and because they did, they annoyed other people. They annoyed the Romans. They annoyed, and of course, they argued that they did this because God told them to do these things, which I could only imagine would further annoy um, whoever else was around. And there was a time when Israel was its own country, and then of course there was the invasions at some point. And I believe that the history was that the they had a kingdom, um, but when the Romans came, they just decided to, um, you know, whoever was in charge at the time didn't want to fight, or if they did, it was not much of a fight, and they became subjects of the Roman Empire. But because of their faith, it was very disciplined. They were very competent. They were very um, you know, discipline builds you up and it makes you strong, and so they were able to take they were able to prosper. And I think that that may be something that has to do with it. Whereas some of the other faiths that were around at the time, the pagans, like I say, Rome eventually collapsed. And Rome eventually collapsed. I know that there was a historian, Gibbon, who wrote, I think, 5 chapters, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And he argued that it was Christianity that brought it down. But Augustine argued that the seeds had already been planted. They had become so corrupt, and they used to have like the gladiators, right? And they used to kill each other, and they used to feed, people to the lions, and people would. This was entertainment, and there was just such corruption, and it declined, and they were invaded. They were no longer strong. And I used to argue that the Roman Empire did survive through the church, because right around the time that it was declining, the church was rising. It had become legalized, and it was spreading everywhere, and the Western world became Christian. Now, these were hard times, but the Christians, carried over with them some of the same ideas that the Jews had. But some of the Jews, they considered themselves separate, and they had formed their own communities. They isolated themselves sometimes, and I believe that it's the Jews, because simple jealousy, simple, there's envy of how successful and how they've been over the years, um, you know, through incredible hardships. During the Spanish, the Inquisitions, and the pogroms that they were going through, they were allowed to lend money, because Christians couldn't, because it was considered usury. But the Jews were allowed to, and so they worked and they prospered. The Jews. My argument is that because they're God commanded them to be this disciplined, to fight their nature. That's one thing that Christianity does, and Judaism by extension, or Judaism and Christianity by extension, is it's not normal for me to have one wife and to be faithful to her forever. Men are variety oriented. I would be going from woman to woman and getting them pregnant and having children everywhere. That's normal for men. That happens in nature, but even if it didn't happen in nature, which some things do and some things they don't, that's normal. As I mentioned in one of the other videos, when the missions went out to convert the Germanic tribes, they had a hard time because because they did not believe that murder was wrong. And when they went around the world to the Pacific Islands, and there were cannibals, and even the Americas, they practiced human sacrifice. And this was this was not in our nature. And so the Jews, because they were the first ones that fought against their nature to elevate themselves to be closer to the divine. And so I think that that's why Jews are hated. And Christians are not far behind, at least not now. Um, you know, there have been some Christian Catholic anti-Semites over the years. That Father Coughlin, I think it was during the time of FDR. He was a radio show, and he would break out these anti-Semitic reigns, anti-Semitic um, just rants. And but and maybe there was something because the nation was more of a Christian nation, and so the Jews are a minority, but they were seen as and they're overrepresented in a lot of places in Hollywood. They're represented among Nobel Prize winners. Why is that? And my argument would be because the discipline that they've had over thousands of years, you know, they seem to be just, when you look at, in sports, you have a lot of players that are African American. And why? A lot of them through years and years and years were laborers. And so I would think that maybe over time they just naturally became stronger. That's, I guess, but that's my argument of why the Jews. Um, and even in today, why the Jews? Why are the Jews singled out? And why is this hatred of them going back to Israel? I was arguing or discussing with my son because a lot of young people today are on the bandwagon supporting Gaza and the Palestinians. And when I first heard of that, I was just like shocked. It's like, really? I found it because they were boycotting Domino's in Starbucks, and I was surprised. And my son was explaining to me why. There was, I think, October 7th, the massacre that happened, and it's justified because they see it as it's been a back and forth. They've been fighting each other, right? And this was their response to being occupied. And I was telling him, I mean, there's a long history that goes on here: the Balfour Declaration, the Peel Commission, the United Nations, the British pulling out that land. All those countries that are there are new countries. Saudi Arabia didn't exist. Jordan didn't exist. Um, Iraq, Syria didn't exist. This was land that was there for a long, long time. And the Kurds don't even have a country of their own. And we don't see that on this side of the ocean. And I'm wondering it's because most of the indigenous here are dead, they're gone, and what's left are people that have been here for only a couple of hundred years. And they were there after the borders were decided. So we don't have any battles here. But on the other side of the world, Pakistan is which also came into existence when India came into existence. All these areas were a lot of tribes and the Tutsis and Hutus, right, that were fighting each other. Um, they were there weren't countries there. There were just these tribes that were just, and once they started creating countries, then you have fights over land, like Ukraine and Russia. It appears that some of that land, Russians are there, and it's crazy to me because they look exactly the same. Maybe language, but that this fighting would go on. Um, just it's tragic that they're fighting over this. But back to the Jews. Um, there had been a country of Israel there, I think twice before, and then when the Romans and then when the Jews were kicked out of there, in the year 70 or so, and um, later that area just became an outpost. There was no country there; it was part of the Roman Empire. And as time went along, it was just land. It was city states. There was nothing there. For one point, it was a lot of Christians were there. That's why the Crusades went to fight the Muslims that didn't even exist back then. The Muslims came into existence with the 6th century, And over a couple of hundred years, they came in and they took it over, and they kicked the Christians out, and then the Crusaders came and kicked them out. But I go back to why the Jews, and that's my um, assessment that they seem to be. It's jealousy. The Jews are very um, resilient people. They've been around for a long time. Um, they've been uh, it's like they've been beaten up so often over the years that they've just become stronger and stronger, and they are successful. And that's looked down upon. That's it's jealousy that they're hated. And I would think in particular, in the Middle East, they're the only democracy that's there. They're the wealthiest. They turned a desert into a powerful nation. Now you could say that some of it was because the U.S. has been supporting them, maybe. Um, but I think the other countries around the area have gotten a lot of money too, and they haven't been able to duplicate what Israel's been able to duplicate. Anyway, that's my rant. Please comment below, give me a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.